During World War II, the Russians secured their place on the world stage as a major tank designer and manufacturer. This was not always the case though. Most of their earlier tank production efforts were in fact copies of Allied tanks. But this was to change in 1942. Russian tanks were considered some of, if not the best tanks in the world. Russian tanks were identified with a T, standing for tank, the British code word given to this type of vehicle to throw the Germans off the scent in their initial inception of World War I. They hoped the Germans would assume they were building water tanks. The T was followed by a number. The number generally represented the year that particular tank was introduced, a system that has been kept for almost all Russian tanks since the very beginning. With World War II over and the Cold War in full swing, the Russian designers wanted to try something different. And so, in the 1960s in Kharkiv, then part of the Soviet Union, and now in modern-day Ukraine, they would get to work. They already had the highly successful T-54 and 55 tanks, but Western armour was quickly outrunning their effectiveness. Soviet doctrine previously opted for quantity over quality, in comparison to their Western counterparts, who opted for quality because they generally had less manpower to draw from. Now, they wanted to reduce the overall height of their tanks. This would have several advantages. A lower overall silhouette being harder to hit and subsequently destroy. A hold-down position would not be as deep, and the main one being weight saving. The weight saving would mean less power would be required from the engine, less materials and thus surely a faster production, more on this later. It would also reduce its ground pressure, making it better in adverse terrain and also nimbler on its feet. But how would they go about achieving this aim? Well, it wasn't as simple as just making the tanks smaller, because they soon realised this would result in the crew compartment being cramped, and the overall round count for the main armament would be too low. All of this was further worsened by upgunning the tank to the larger 125mm gun over the previous 115 that was fitted. They needed a solution. This would be in the form of replacing one of the crew members, the loader, with an automated system. Two-part rounds would be stored in a carousel system in the turret floor as opposed to on racks all around the turret. But the design wouldn't stop there. The T-62 and T-64 were to be a first in several features in tank design that are still used to this day. A far cry from copying Western tanks at the beginning. The aforementioned auto-loading system in a conventional turreted tank was one of them. Another that it carried on from its earlier variant, the T-62, was composite armour, offering a better protection rate over simply using steel. It would be called K-combination by the West, and it would feature aluminium alloy later to be replaced by fiberglass. A smoothbore main gun. The T-62 was given the first smoothbore fitted to a tank with a 115mm Molot. This also had the first successful armour-piercing, fin-stabilised, discarding sabot rounds, albeit with a steel penetrator at the beginning, but later with depleted uranium. This was thought to be 10 to 20% more effective than the heat rounds used at the time. The 115mm gun would be upgraded in the T-64 to a 125mm version, the largest gun mounted to a tank at the time. This would also be capable of firing an anti-tank guided missile, a revolutionary concept. Another revolutionary feature was its engine, the 5 TDF opposed piston diesel engine. Its engine bay was half the size of a conventional diesel, which lent itself to the low profile requirement. But, as with a lot of new designs, it was plagued with unreliability. Its overall design would be refined and continued in later vehicles. Its complexity would be part of the reason it would be so expensive and hard to manufacture. Other impressive features included the ability for it to fully submerge to cross water obstacles using a snorkel, or up to 1.8 meters without. The T-64 in its lifetime would see gun stabilization and fire control systems, night vision and thermal capabilities, MBT protection, an array of different sensors, and even a remote-controlled anti-aircraft gun so the commander could stay protected when it was in use. Unfortunately, the T-64 would prove a bit of a failure, especially on the export market. It would cost twice as much as its predecessor, the T-54 and T-55. Prospective buyers in the Soviets themselves realising that the two T-55s were far better value than one complicated and hard to maintain T-64. There was one area the tank was a success. It paved the way for modern tank design, and many of its features were carried on into future designs on both sides. But the life of the T-64 tanks did not end there. Ukraine, being the manufacturer of the tank, carried on production after the fall of the Soviet Union and has continued to upgrade it, not only in lethality, but also protection and reliability. Its modern iterations you can see on the battlefields of Ukraine today, taking the fight up against its former ally, Russia.